Good evening, everybody. Once again, too dark to see anything, so we're just gonna go like this. Helps me keep my eyes on the road like this. I want to talk about something that I spoke about in the previous video. Maybe I'll cut a little bit shorter or focus only on this one subject. This week's Parsha, we have this week's Torah reading, this week's scriptural reading in the synagogue, liturgically speaking. We were introduced to Abraham, still called Abram, at the end of last week's reading. And so here we are, Genesis 12, 13, 14. And we have Abraham, still Abram, being told to leave his homeland and go to the land where God shows you, where God would show him. And then he goes down to Egypt, he comes back, and all these different things happen, and then eventually he is back in Canaan, and there's a war. The war of the 4 kings and the 5 kings. And at the end of the war, this mysterious figure appears. Basically really only have 4 verses in the entire Hebrew scripture about, if that many, perhaps only 3. And in Hebrew he's called Melchizedek. And in English he's often called Melchizedek. In English it's presented as one word, Melchizedek, the name, and in Hebrew it's generally, and not only in English but actually in other Western languages, the ancient and early Bible translations, both in the Greek Septuagint and in the Latin Vulgate, Melchizedek is one word, but in Hebrew it's Melchizedek, 2 words. Malki means my king, Melech means king, and that E at the end is the singular possessive. So Malki, Tzedek, and then Tzedek means righteousness. So my king is righteous, my king is righteousness, my righteous king. There's various ways to translate that. And it seems that this was some kind of a title more than an actual name. And so who is this Melchizedek? Who is this person? Melchizedek. And what does this mean? Because we have one other reference where those 2 words appear together. Melchizedek, my king, righteousness, is in Psalm 110, where it says, V'atechohen lo'olam al divrasi Melchizedek. It says you were a priest forever, and generally it's translated in English as by the order of Melchizedek, which seems to be some kind of a special ordination, whereas the word divrasi I would render more, I would say, by my word you are my righteous king. And it's often understood that this is speaking to David. When it says David, to David, doesn't necessarily mean by David, even though it might also be by David, but also to David, meaning that perhaps David talking to himself, or God talking to David, speaking to him, the Ruach HaKodesh, the Spirit of Holiness that God spoke through David to David, and God said to David, you are a priest forever. By my word, you are my righteous king. You are my true king. Something like that. Interesting approach. But again, it's fascinating that here you have this title again, Melchizedek. Now, the Jewish traditions generally say that this Melchizedek was Shem ben Noach. Shem the son of Noah. And the reason why he showed up after this war was to tell Abraham, I have no hard feelings. Even though you and your armies killed some of my grandchildren, but you're also my grandchild, and there's no hard feelings. And that's basically, what we have there. And even to the point to say, he's bringing bread and wine. I know traditional Christians, particularly Catholics, will say, look at Melchizedek, he is a priest and he's offering the Eucharist already, and already this early in history. And Rashi starts off by saying, don't think it's anything religious. These guys, they're tired from the war. Let them eat, let them drink, let them feel better after the difficulty of fighting in a war. But then he goes on to say that also, that's the one reason. The other reason is, like we said, no hard feelings. And the third reason is perhaps a religious reason, as a remez, as a hint, because he's Melech Shalem, the king of Salem, which is understood to be Jerusalem, and that's a hint that in the future there would be, grain offerings and wine libations offered in Jerusalem in the temple, and perhaps that's even where they met, was on the Temple Mount, perhaps. But even if not, but that there in Jerusalem is where they met, or at least he was the king of Jerusalem. Maybe it wasn't even in Jerusalem. It's all well and good, but I wanted to look at something else. I was listening to a recording from Rabbi Ariel Bar Tzadok, who I had the chus to meet once, talked on the phone one other time. Very, very fine person, interesting person, different person. I think we're a similar type of out-of-the-box type of Orthodox Jews. And I've been very highly influenced by his teachings over the years, even if I don't agree with everything he says, but I found him to be very influential to me. And Rabbi Bar Tzadok said, what is this Order of Melchizedek? Because, different Christian traditions have their interesting approaches to Melchizedek. Particularly, the Mormons are obsessed with the Melchizedek priesthood and what does it mean to hold the Melchizedek priesthood. The Midrash says a very interesting thing, that actually the priesthood was taken away from Melchizedek and given to to Abraham, because if you look in the scripture, Melchizedek says, Baruch Avram, Lekel Elyon, blessed be Abram, to the Most High God. And then blessed be Most High God, who protected you and saved you from your enemies. And so the Midrash says that the homiletical teachings of the rabbis teach that Melchizedek lost his priesthood and was bestowed upon Abraham. In a sense, Melchizedek was passing that mantle on to Abraham. Some even say that Melchizedek had a garment that belonged to Adam that had been passed through the generations, and Noah had it, and he gave it to Melchizedek, and Melchizedek gave it to Abraham. Which is interesting why he wouldn't first give it to his grandson Eber, who in our traditions is also a great teacher. We talk of Yeshiva Shem Ve'Ever, that there's the academy, the seminary of Shem and Eber, where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob all studied, ethical monotheism. They all studied Torah from Shem and Eber. And also Shem is described as the oracle that Rebecca went to when she was pregnant and she was confused, and she said she went to seek out God. And the Jewish tradition, the Jewish legends say that she went to a prophet, and that prophet was Shem ben Noah, to Melchizedek. So all of this is fascinating. But what I found very fascinating was how Rabbi Bar Tzadok said he wanted to break all the mythology of Melchizedek, all the pomp and circumstance that the Mormons and other groups have made, with all due respect to the Mormons and these other groups. He didn't mean it in a disrespectful way, but he said, when we have in the time of Eliyahu, in the teachings of Elijah the prophet, that doesn't matter a man or a woman, a Jew, a Gentile, a free man or a slave, they can all be worthy to Ruach HaKodesh, they can all be worthy to the inspiration of the Spirit of Holiness, based on their deeds. And in a similar vein, Rabbi Bar Tzadok was saying that really anyone who is a servant is a Melchizedek priest. And he was talking about what the priesthood means. And although we have the priesthood of Aaron, the Aaronic priesthood, it's not the only priesthood, because the whole Israelite nation is called the kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And he was saying that really anybody who's a servant can be a priest. It holds this Melchizedekian priesthood. And they don't need to be ordained or anything special. And he was pointing out that part of this service, he said, because the Kohen wasn't someone who was all high and mighty, but rather he was down and dirty. He was a butcher. He was slaughtering animals, got all dirty and bloody. And he said the same thing, if you get down and dirty and are there to help people who are really in need, and be there to serve in places that you might not think are so dignified, but you're there to serve and to help people and to feed the poor and the hungry, the widows and the orphans. That's the true priesthood. And he was saying, it doesn't matter what religion you are, this and that. And I found it, I agree with him what he's saying, but I was curious, where does he get this idea? And he doesn't always cite all of his sources, but I know he has sources. And when I was reflecting on this, I was recognizing that the word Kohen, as we say, is translated as priest, right? It's not the only word that's translated as priest. You have the word Komer, which is usually an idolatrous priest, and that's used in modern Hebrew to mean a priest of another faith. But even though in our traditional religious texts, although the word Komer does appear, you also have, it says Kohanehem, they're priests. So there is this idea of a priesthood and so forth, but the thing that I wanted to look at, what I find fascinating, is the Targum, especially Targum Onkelos, which is our most beloved Targum. The Targum is the Aramaic translation of the scripture. They're different Targumim, they're different Aramaic translations of scripture by different authors. And on the Pentateuch we have the Targum Onkelos. And we have the translation of Onkelos Hager. Onkelos was a proselyte. He was a convert, apparently some kind of a Roman nobleman. And but the thing is that many of the traditions say that the Targum Onkelos was actually given at Mount Sinai, and it was just Onkelos who wrote it down, and he did not author it, which is a fascinating idea. But in any event, mentioned this before, and we discussed this at work on Tuesday. When we look at this, the Targum Onkelos, I know especially a lot of scholars like to make word studies, and a lot of Christians like to do that. They'll see that there's a word in Hebrew might be translated different ways in English, but it's the same Hebrew word. Or similarly, there might be an English word that's used for different Hebrew words, and what are the connections there? So there we have this where it says I think of the word malach. In English, it sometimes says angel, and in English it sometimes says messenger. And so too in Aramaic, if it's an angel, it says something, malacha. And if it's a servant, I remember it's something like, is the guy, I don't remember the exact word. We'll put that aside. But here, the word kohen, I discussed this in the previous video, but it's worthwhile to look at this. Usually, when we're talking about the priests, the sons of Aaron, the word is kahana. I mean, there's a last name like that, kahana. It was one of the families of the Spinker Rebbes. Their last name's Kahana, and so that's just pretty much the Aramaic version of the word Kohen. I mean, people know Meir Kahana. But the word Kohen is not always translated in Aramaic as Kahana. Sometimes by Yisro Kohen Midian, Chesed Moshe, Jethro is called the Kohen. You could say the priest of Midian. He's the father-in-law of Moses. It doesn't say, in Aramaic, it doesn't say Kahanat Midian. It says Rabbah de Midian. You could say the chief of Midian, the chieftain. We've discussed in the past this question of religious and political leaders being one and the same. And perhaps this Yisro Kohen Midian was both a religious leader and a political leader. But he's called Rabbah the Midian. He's called the chief, the great one, the leader of Midian. And here, where it says by Melchizedek, and it says V'hu Kohen Lekel Elyon, and he is a priest of the Most High God. The Aramaic translation does not say Kahana, Lelokoi, but rather Mishamesh Lelokoi, that he is a servant of the Most High God, a minister, you could say, of the Most High God, or even a deacon or a sexton, something like that, a shamish. In the Arabic-speaking churches, they call a deacon a samas. It's the same type of word. And so, and it's interesting. Perhaps it's an indication, somewhat like what we were saying in the with this word Kohen. perhaps he lost his priesthood and gave it to Abraham, and so he was reduced to diaconate. I don't know, but I don't think it doesn't usually happen that way. You go from the diaconate to the priesthood, right? In traditional Christian churches. It's not that he was defrocked or anything, even though he's giving his frock over to Abraham, according to some midrashic sources. But the idea that he's called Mishamesh really drives with that which Rabbi Bar Tzadok was saying, that he is that to be a Melchizedekian priest means essentially to be a servant, and that's what it says, Behu Mishamesh, and he's a servant. So it's an interesting approach, and so it would go along with what Rabbi Bar Tzadok was teaching, that to be a Melchizedek priest means to be a servant, and that's actually, and when I was looking for a source for that very beautiful teaching that he gave, I believe that the Targum Onkelos there in Genesis 14 is pointing to that idea of being a servant, and again, and what was Melchizedek doing when he was bringing the bread and wine? It wasn't this token, little sip of wine and little cracker that he was bringing. He was actually feeding the people who were hungry after the war, and that was his service. That was his ministry, was to feed the hungry soldiers after the war and give them something to drink, not as a little token of some religious devotion, some ceremony, but to actually feed them. We think about certain tzaddikim that we have in our tradition, and of course Avram Avinu and Melchizedek are in our tradition. But I'm talking, we were comparing there to other traditions. But we think of the story of Reb Shaila Karastir. Many stories about Reb Shaila Karastir. And he was always serving food to hungry Jews. That was Shaila ben Moshe, Shaila Karastir, whose brother-in-law was my great-great-grandfather's stepbrother, or half-brother, or something along, a stepbrother. So we have some connections from Shaila, and not only that, but his brother is buried right next to my great-grandparents in Staten Island, about maybe 100 feet away, in the same chelka. It's a small chelka, that Hungarian chelka in the Baron Hirsch Cemetery. I was there one time. But the stories they say of Reb Shaila Karastir, to say that if when all the other tzaddikim before Tekiyah Shofar, they were before the shofar blast on Rosh Hashanah, they were meditating all kinds of deep Kabbalistic meditations and going to the mikveh perhaps a second time. They were just there not 3-4 hours ago, or maybe 2 hours ago, whatever it is, and the whole idea. What was Reb Shaila doing? He was cutting up the cake so that when people would make kiddush after Musaf, it would be easy to eat, and they wouldn't have to take that extra step of cutting the cake. Reb Shaila already cut it for them, and making sure all the food was ready so the hungry Jews would have what to eat. And so that's That's what our priesthood is. That's what our sainthood is. That's what our ministry is feeding the hungry. And yes, that also includes, like some Lamayim, V'lo Rav Lech, and Kim L'Shmayis Dvar Hashem. Of course, what the Navi Amos said, what the Prophet Amos said, that it's not just feeding people physically. We also have to feed them spiritually. That there'll be a famine in the land, and not a thirst for water, and not a hunger for bread, but to hear the word of the Lord. It's indeed true. Of course, it's true, and so we're feeding the hungry also when we're ministering by teaching Torah. But that's also part of it. I mean, sometimes it's hard to take time to teach Torah. Sometimes you want to be learning yourself, or sometimes you want to be watching a movie or doing something else, or you want to be eating, or you want to be spending time with your family. You have all kinds of important things to do, or just relaxing or fun things to do. And instead, you're taking time to teach Torah to other Jews, to other people, to other human beings, whoever they are, Jew or Gentile. It doesn't matter. We're teaching Torah. We're feeding the hungry there, because people are hungry to hear the word of the Lord. And we see that today. People are hungry to hear the word of the Lord. and people are so interested in anything that's spiritual, anything that's religious. There's a big fascination there. You go on a website like Quora.com, which it's a love-hate relationship I have with that website. I think today I put my first question on Quora. I don't think I ever put a question before. And I put a stupid question, but I was looking for stupid answers. But I was honest. That's really what I'd like to see. And I thought about it today because, I see Jeff Sessions is running for Senate again, right? It was the whole thing when Jeff Sessions left the Senate, they had to replace him, and so now what happened? A Democrat took the seat, right? Or at least for a short time. So now Jeff Sessions is running for the seat again, and he's still very loyal to the president, even though the president sent him away. And I was like, it's a shame that they had to hire Jeff Sessions for this role, and we lost him in the Senate. It was a shame, but they. Right? Wasn't that the seat that Roy Moore was running for? I don't remember. But anyway, Jeff Sessions, a good senator, so now he's running for his old seat, get his old seat back. And I was thinking about this. I was like, couldn't President Trump just like make up some new cabinet position? Could he make AOC the Secretary of Fashion or something, and then get her out of the Congress, and then fire her, instead of losing good people from Congress and the Senate, let's give some positions to some pretty rotten people and get rid of them. Make Dianne Feinstein, some kind of a cabinet member. Make Nancy Pelosi a cabinet member. So I asked that, could we do that? The obvious answer is though because the president and then he fired Jeff Sessions, and now he's out of a job. So. So hopefully he'll be back in the Senate, and so that's the story there. That's that was my question. And someone accused me of being like some kind of like a left-wing anti-Trump conspiracy theorist. I was like, no, this is what I want him to do. Get rid of them all, Give them some kind of other job. Appoint them, ambassador to Timbuktu, you know? You know, make Rashida Tlaib the ambassador to Palestine, you know? Make Ilhan Omar the ambassador to Somalia, you know? That'd be great, you know? So, I wanted to make a 5-minute video, ramble on for a half hour. I'm almost home. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment, and we'll see you all later. I hope everything's well. Thank you for listening to my silly ramblings, but especially the end, we got a little silly, but that's a good idea. Let's make, you know, make AOC the ambassador to Cuba. Make Ilhan Omar ambassador to Somalia. And there you go. You know, problem solved. Alright.